You thought facing your shadow would set you free, but now you can't feel anything. No fire, no direction, no desire to move forward. You wake up each morning and the things that used to drive you, the goals, the ambitions, the endless pursuit of more, feel like someone else's dreams, like you're looking at a life that belongs to a stranger. You're not lazy, you're not broken, you're not even depressed. You've just lost the mask that called itself your purpose. And what's underneath feels like nothing at all. But what if this nothingness isn't emptiness? What if it's spaciousness? What if losing your motivation isn't the end of your story, but the beginning of your real one? Nobody tells you that after shadow work, after all the emotional excavation and brutal self-honesty, you might wake up one day and feel absolutely nothing. Not peace, not happiness, not even clarity, just emptiness. As if all the fuel that once kept you running has mysteriously vanished overnight. The productivity obsession that used to get you out of bed, gone. The people-pleasing that made you say yes to everything, exhausting. The constant striving for validation that shaped every decision. It feels hollow now, like applauding an empty theater. You scroll through social media and watch others celebrating their wins, their hustles, their breakthrough moments, and you feel disconnected. Not jealous, you're past that. Not inspired, that engine seems broken. Just distant, like you're watching life through thick glass, wondering how everyone else still has access to that drive you can no longer locate within yourself. Your friends notice. You seem different, they say. Less intense. And they're right. The edge that used to define you, that relentless pursuit that others admired and sometimes feared, has simply evaporated. But Carl Jung warned us about this moment. He called it the necessary death that precedes rebirth. In his own words, the privilege of a lifetime is being who you are, but before you can be who you are, you have to stop being who you're not. The collapse of the persona, that carefully constructed identity you've been wearing like armor, doesn't happen with dramatic fanfare. It doesn't come with trumpet blasts or spiritual epiphanies. It happens in silence, in the stillness after the storm, in the eerie calm where the fire used to burn. You didn't fail the healing process. You didn't do something wrong. You didn't take a wrong turn somewhere along the way. You're simply standing in the sacred void between who you were and who you're becoming. And this void, uncomfortable as it is exactly where transformation happens. There's a strange grief in losing your old self. Not because it was perfect or even healthy, but because it was familiar, predictable. It knew how to navigate the world, even if that navigation was built on fear and performance, and the exhausting need to prove your worthiness with every breath. Let me tell you about Sarah. She's 29, works in marketing for a mid-sized tech company in Austin, and for years she was the friend everyone called when they needed someone reliable. She was the colleague who stayed late without being asked, the daughter who never disappointed her parents, the girlfriend who anticipated every need before it was expressed. Sarah said yes to everything, volunteered for extra projects, organized birthday parties for acquaintances, helped friends move apartments even when she was exhausted. Her entire sense of worth came from being needed, from being the solution to other people's problems. She was good at it too. Exceptionally good. She could read a room like a psychological map, instantly knowing what each person needed from her to feel comfortable. She was a shapeshifter, becoming whatever version of herself would be most helpful, most loved, most indispensable. But it was killing her slowly. The constant vigilance, the perpetual performance. The way she'd lost track of what she actually wanted because she'd become so skilled at wanting what others wanted for her. Then she started therapy. Started recognizing her patterns. Started seeing how her helpfulness was actually a sophisticated defense mechanism, a way to avoid rejection by making herself indispensable. Her therapist used a phrase that hit like lightning. You've become addicted to being needed because you're terrified of being seen. The shadow work was brutal but liberating. She learned to set boundaries. She started saying no. She began to recognize her own needs, buried under decades of prioritizing everyone else's. For the first time in her adult life, she started asking herself what she actually wanted instead of what she should want. But then something unexpected happened. The thing that had always motivated her, the rush of being needed, the dopamine hit of solving other people's problems, the warm glow of being appreciated, it just disappeared. She'd wake up and think, I should check my emails. But then she'd just sit there, not out of rebellion, not out of exhaustion, just out of a profound lack of interest in the performance. The script she'd been following her entire life suddenly felt foreign in her mouth. Her friends started asking if she was okay. Her productivity at work dropped. She felt guilty, like she was failing some invisible standard that everyone else seemed to understand instinctively. But what Sarah was experiencing wasn't failure. It was the natural consequence of removing a mask she'd worn for so long, she'd forgotten her face was underneath. You know this feeling, don't you? The way everything that used to motivate you now feels hollow. You used to chase validation because it felt like survival. Now even praise feels empty because you can see through the game. You understand now that the applause was never for you. It was for your performance. You used to perform for love because you believed, somewhere deep in your unconscious, that your authentic self wasn't lovable enough. Now, performance itself feels like betraying something sacred within you. What once gave you a sense of identity, the hustle, the ambition, the roles you played so perfectly, now feels like wearing someone else's skin. Uncomfortable, foreign, wrong in a way you can't articulate but can feel in your bones. And so, you pause. You feel guilty for not wanting to push through like you used to. You think something must be fundamentally wrong with you. Everyone else seems to have their act together while you're sitting in this strange numbness, wondering where your drive went, wondering if you'll ever feel excited about anything again. But here's what's really happening. The engine you've depended on your entire adult life was never truly yours. It was built by fear, by survival, by the shadow belief that you weren't enough as you are, that your value was conditional on your output, that love had to be earned through achievement and service, and the careful curation of an acceptable self. Pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Feel into your body. Is this what you've been carrying all along? This sense that your worth was always conditional on your performance, your output, your ability to meet other people's expectations. The person you're grieving, that driven, goal-oriented, endlessly productive version of yourself, wasn't your authentic self. It was your survival self, and survival selves are exhausting to maintain because they're built on the shaky foundation of external validation, which means you're only as secure as your last accomplishment, only as loved as your most recent success. Now that foundation has cracked, and without it, you're left with something you've rarely allowed yourself to experience. Just being you, without the performance, without the hustle, without the need to prove your worthiness through accomplishment. It's terrifying, because who are you without your achievements? Who are you without your roles? Who are you when you're not trying to be anything at all? And yet, it's exactly where you need to be. This numbness you're feeling isn't apathy. It's not depression, though it might masquerade as such. It's not spiritual bypassing or psychological regression or any of the other labels we use to pathologize what is actually a natural part of psychological development. It's a sacred dismantling. Jung understood this phase intimately, both intellectually and experientially. He went through his own dark night of the soul, his own confrontation with what he called the most difficult experiment of my life, the process of individuation. He called it the beginning of becoming psychologically whole, the integration of conscious and unconscious minds. But Jung also understood that individuation doesn't begin with a flash of insight or a moment of enlightenment. It doesn't start with finding yourself. It starts with losing yourself. Specifically, losing the self you thought you were. Individuation begins with the ego, finally stopping its exhausting performance of being the whole truth. When you've done enough shadow work, when you've looked at your patterns and defense mechanisms with honest eyes, when you've seen how much of your life has been shaped by unconscious fears and unexamined beliefs, something profound shifts. The ego realizes it's not in charge anymore. And without the ego's constant commentary, without its endless need to improve and achieve and become, there's just you. Not the you that gets promoted, not the you that makes everyone proud, not the you that has it all figured out, just the soft, disoriented, beautifully human you that's never had a chance to speak, above the noise of performance. And this you doesn't scream for attention. It whispers. It speaks in the language of intuition rather than logic, of feeling rather than thinking, of being rather than doing. It communicates through the body, through dreams, through those moments of inexplicable knowing that arrive without explanation. But our culture has trained us to listen for the screams. We're addicted to the adrenaline of urgency, the dopamine of achievement, the external validation that tells us we matter. We've been conditioned to equate noise with importance, busyness with worthiness, constant motion with progress. So when the soul finally has space to whisper, when there's finally silence in the internal landscape, we panic. We think something's wrong because we can't hear the familiar roar of ambition. We mistake the quiet for emptiness when it's actually fullness. The fullness of presence, of being, of finally having space to exist without agenda. Here's a question to sit with, not to answer immediately, but to let it work on you. What if the thing you think you've lost was never meant to be permanent? What if your driven, productive self was just a phase, a necessary adaptation that served its purpose and is now naturally dissolving to make space for something truer? Let me share another story. David is 32, a software engineer who spent years climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious tech company in Seattle. He had his entire life mapped out. Goals for the next 5 years, optimization strategies for everything from his morning routine to his retirement savings, a carefully planned trajectory towards senior leadership. David was the kind of person who tracked his metrics: steps per day, hours of sleep, books read, per month, networking events attended. He had spreadsheets for his spreadsheets. His apartment was a shrine to productivity: standing desk, blue light blockers, a collection of self-improvement books that he'd not just read, but annotated. He was successful by every external measure, rising quickly in his field, earning more each year, building the kind of resume that impressed people at parties. Then his father died unexpectedly. Heart attack at 58, just dropped dead in the middle of a Tuesday morning jog. And something in David broke open. Not in a dramatic way. He didn't have a breakdown, or quit his job in a blaze of glory, or throw his laptop off a cliff. But something fundamental shifted. The goals that had once excited him felt arbitrary. The metrics he'd used to measure his worth felt hollow. The carefully constructed future he'd been building seemed like someone else's dream. He started showing up to work and doing his job competently, but without the edge of ambition that had defined him for years. His manager noticed, his girlfriend noticed, David himself noticed, and it scared him. "I used to care so much," he told me when we talked, "about the promotion, about the project deadlines, about optimizing every aspect of my life. Now I just don't. I show up, I do good work, but I don't feel driven by it anymore. It's like watching someone else's life." His girlfriend suggested therapy, worried he was depressed. His manager offered him a sabbatical, thinking he was burned out. His friends tried to cheer him up with weekend trips and activities. But David wasn't depressed. He wasn't burned out. He was transforming. Instead of panicking, David began to get curious about this new internal landscape. He started paying attention to what remained when the drive disappeared. What was still there when he wasn't trying to improve or achieve or become? He discovered something remarkable. A capacity for presence he'd never known he had. An ability to listen, really listen to his girlfriend when she talked about her day, instead of half-listening while planning his response. An appreciation for simple moments that had previously felt like wasted time. The way light moved across his kitchen table, the sound of rain on his apartment windows, the taste of coffee when he wasn't drinking it while checking emails. The fire hadn't gone out. It had moved deeper, underground, where it could burn through what didn't truly belong to him and illuminate what did. David started making different choices, smaller choices mostly. He stopped optimizing his morning routine and started sitting with his coffee in silence. He declined networking events that felt obligatory. He said no to projects that were career-advancing, but soul-deadening. "It's weird," it said. "I'm doing less, but I feel more like myself than I have in years." This is what Jung meant by the transcendent function, the psychological mechanism that bridges the conscious and unconscious minds. It doesn't happen through force or effort or willpower. It happens through surrender, through allowing the old structures to dissolve so new ones can emerge organically. You're not running from your problems anymore because you've finally stopped identifying yourself as a problem to be solved. You're not trying to fix yourself because you've realized you were never broken, and without that constant self-improvement project running in the background, without the endless narrative of becoming better, there's space for something else to emerge. Something not driven by fear or inadequacy or the need to prove yourself. Something rooted in your actual nature rather than your survival strategies. This is the turning point most people miss, because it doesn't feel like a turning point. It feels like stagnation, like being stuck in quicksand while everyone else moves forward with purpose and clarity. But you're not stuck, you're wintering in nature. Winter isn't failure. It's not the absence of growth or the season of death, despite appearances. It's a different kind of growth, one that happens beneath the surface, in the darkness, where roots deepen and systems regenerate. Trees don't stop growing in winter. They just grow differently, inward instead of outward, deeper instead of higher. Your psyche is doing the same thing. While your ego mourns the loss of its familiar patterns, while your conscious mind worries about productivity and progress, your unconscious is busy reorganizing, integrating, composting old patterns, and preparing for a different kind of spring. But our productivity-obsessed culture has no language for this phase. We're taught that if we're not moving forward, we're moving backward. If we're not excited, we're depressed. If we're not driven, we're lazy. We've internalized the capitalist myth that worth equals output, that value equals visible progress. If this resonates, if you're feeling that recognition in your chest like a gentle bell being struck, stay with me. The next few minutes might feel like looking in a mirror, uncomfortable but necessary. You may still look at your life and wonder, why does none of this excite me anymore? The career path you were on, the goals you had mapped out, the version of success you were chasing, it all feels like it belongs to someone else. Like looking at clothes in your closet that you can't imagine ever wanting to wear again. Because it does belong to someone else. It belongs to the person you had to become, to survive, to be loved, to be accepted, to be enough in a world that profits from your sense of not enoughness. But you're no longer that person. You're no longer trying to impress a world that never saw your fullness anyway. You're no longer performing for an audience that was never really watching the real you. You're not here to perform. You're here to integrate. What you're feeling is not a lack of purpose. It's a rejection of false purpose. The shadow work didn't strip you of meaning. It stripped you of illusion. It cleared away the borrowed dreams and inherited ambitions and culturally mandated goals to reveal what was always there underneath. Your actual desires, your authentic values, your real purpose. But authentic purpose doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It doesn't come with a detailed action plan or a 5-year strategy. It emerges slowly, like a shy animal stepping into a clearing. It requires silence to be heard and stillness to be seen. And underneath all those illusions, something tender is awakening. Something that doesn't need external validation to know its worth. Something that doesn't need constant achievement to justify its existence. Something that knows, with a deep cellular knowing, that you are enough exactly as you are. This new motivation, when it comes, and it will come, won't feel like the old fire. It won't be fueled by inadequacy or fear of not being enough or the desperate need to prove yourself worthy of love. It will be quieter, steadier, rooted in truth rather than performance. You might find yourself drawn to things you'd previously dismissed as impractical or unproductive. Art for art's sake. Conversations that serve no networking purpose. Activities that feed your soul rather than your resume. Rest that isn't earned. Pleasure that isn't guilty. You might start valuing depth over breadth, quality over quantity, being over becoming. You might discover that your sensitivity, which you've always seen as a weakness, is actually a superpower. That your need for solitude isn't antisocial but necessary. That your questions are more valuable than your answers. Your new relationship with motivation will be like the difference between a house fire and a hearth. The house fire burns hot and fast and consumes everything in its path, leaving only ash and destruction. The hearth burns steady and warm and sustains life without destroying it. It can be banked and rekindled. It provides consistent heat without needing constant feeding. Jung wrote extensively about this transition in his concept of the first and second halves of life. The first half, he said, is focused on ego development and external achievement, building career, establishing identity, accumulating resources, proving yourself in the world. The second half is focused on meaning and individuation, integrating the shadow, connecting with the unconscious, discovering your authentic self. But this isn't about chronological age. It's about psychological development. Some people begin this transition at 25. Others never make it at all, spending their entire lives in service to the ego's agenda, never discovering who they really are beneath the performance. You're making this transition right now. In this very moment of feeling lost and unmotivated and confused, you are in the midst of the most important work a human being can do, becoming yourself. Take a moment and breathe into this question. What if this period of apparent stagnation is actually the most productive time of your life, just not in any way you've been taught to measure productivity? You're not behind schedule. There is no schedule. You're not missing some crucial window of opportunity. The only opportunity that matters is the one right in front of you. The opportunity to stop performing and start being. So no, you haven't lost your fire. It's just moved deeper, underground, where it can burn through what doesn't belong and illuminate what does. You're not lazy. You're not behind. You're not broken or damaged or missing some essential piece that everyone else has. You are shedding. You are becoming. You are no longer ruled by the ego's narrow definition of worth. Because now your worth is rooted in something unshakable. Not in what you do, but in who you are. Not in your productivity, but in your presence. Not in your achievements, but in your being. Not in your performance, but in your essence. The spark will return, but not like a roar, as a whisper. Gentle, true, unmistakably yours, when it does come back. And it will, though not according to any timeline. You try to impose, you'll recognize it immediately because it won't be asking you to prove anything. It won't be demanding that you optimize or improve or become someone other than who you are. It won't come with a business plan or a 5-year strategy or a list of metrics to track. It will simply remind you that the real you was never missing, just waiting for the noise to quiet down, waiting for the performance to end, waiting for silence to feel safe enough to come home. This new motivation will have entirely different qualities from what you're used to. It will be sustainable rather than frantic, nourishing rather than depleting, aligned with your actual values rather than borrowed from a culture that profits from your insecurity. It will feel like coming home to yourself rather than trying to become someone else. You might find yourself saying no to opportunities that would have excited the old you but feel wrong to the new you. You might start making choices based on how they feel in your body rather than how they look on paper. You might prioritize relationships over networking, depth over visibility, meaning over money. You might discover that rest is not the enemy of productivity, but its foundation. That boundaries are not selfish, but sacred. That your sensitivity is not weakness, but wisdom. That your questions are more valuable than your answers. That your uncertainty is more honest than false confidence. Take a moment and sit with this question, not to answer it immediately, but to let it work on you over time. What would you do if you didn't have to prove your worth through doing? What would you choose if approval wasn't a factor? What would you create if you weren't trying to impress anyone? The answers might surprise you. They might be smaller than you expected. More ordinary. More human. Less Instagram-worthy. Less impressive to others, but more meaningful to you. And that's exactly right. You're not here to be superhuman. You're not here to optimize yourself into some perfected version that never makes mistakes or feels lost or questions their path. You're here to be authentically human, messy and beautiful and imperfect and real and gloriously, courageously yourself. Jung believed that the greatest tragedy of modern life was the split between our conscious and unconscious minds. The persona we show the world and the shadow we hide from ourselves, the roles we play and the truth we are, the masks we wear and the face we were born with. Individuation, becoming whole, requires healing this split. It requires bringing the unconscious into consciousness, integrating the shadow, embracing the rejected parts of yourself, letting the false self die so the true self can be born. This process is never linear. It doesn't happen once and then you're done, fixed forever, graduated from the school of becoming. It's a spiral, a deepening, a continuous becoming. You'll cycle through periods of clarity and confusion, motivation and emptiness, expansion and contraction. And that's not failure. That's the natural rhythm of growth. Right now, in this moment of feeling unmotivated and lost and confused, you are in the very heart of this process. You are doing the most important work a human being can do, becoming yourself. Not the self your family wanted you to be, not the self your culture demanded, not the self your fears created, or your traumas shaped, or your survival strategies constructed. Your actual self, the one that was there before you learned to perform, the one that will be there after all the masks fall away, the one that doesn't need to become anything, because it already is everything it needs to be. This self doesn't need motivation, because it is motivation. It doesn't need purpose, because it is purpose. It doesn't need to prove its worth, because its worth is intrinsic, unchangeable, already whole. Trust this process. Trust this emptiness. Trust this strange, sacred space between who you were and who you're becoming. Because on the other side of this winter is not just spring, but a completely different way of being alive. One that doesn't require you to exhaust yourself proving your worth. One that doesn't demand you perform for love or achieve for acceptance or optimize for approval. One that knows your worth is intrinsic, unchangeable, already whole. If you've made it this far, if these words have touched something deep in you, if you felt seen and understood in ways you didn't expect, consider this an invitation to go deeper, not just into my content, but into yourself, into the quiet spaces where your truth lives, into the stillness where your authentic self is waiting. Like this video, if it resonated with something in you. Subscribe if you want more content about the courage to be real, about authentic psychology, about the messy, beautiful process of becoming human. But more importantly, take what served you here and carry it into your life. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. Comment below with one thing that shifted for you. But most importantly, be gentle with yourself as you navigate this transition. Trust your process. Honor your timing. Know that you're exactly where you need to be. The world needs more people who have done this inner work, who have faced their shadows and integrated their wholeness, who have stopped performing and started being, who have chosen authenticity over approval, depth over superficiality, truth over comfort. You are one of those people. Even in this moment of feeling lost, especially in this moment of feeling lost, you are exactly who the world needs you to be. Not the polished, perfected version, not the one with all the answers. Not the one who never doubts or questions or feels confused. The real you, the one who's willing to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. The one who's brave enough to let the false self die. The one who trusts that something truer is being born in the silence. Welcome home to yourself. The real you has been waiting your whole life for this moment. The moment when you finally stop running and start being. When you finally stop performing and start existing. When you finally stop becoming and start recognizing that you already are. You already are everything you need to be. You always have been. You always will be. Welcome home.